Well, we made it back from San Antonio safe and sound, and I'm back at my workbench. I did upload 2 videos about what took place down at Lackland Air Force Base with the graduation from basic military training of my oldest grandson. And if you're interested, bop on over there and take a look at it, part 1 and part 2. Meanwhile, it's back to the bench again, trying to resolve this issue right here. It's just not... As soon as I bring it up, just not working. Anyway, I'm not having much luck, but I'm going to go ahead and keep at it. Meanwhile, I took the advice of one of my YouTube responders from the last video, and I pulled the turntable back out and did a little work on that. Now, that work was done prior to leaving for Lackland Air Force Base. I just didn't have time to get it uploaded. So, take a look at that while I continue to try to figure out what's wrong with this, and I'll come back with you at the end, and I think it'll probably still not be fixed. In order for the motor to come out, it looks like I'm going to have to remove the platter because the screws come from the top down, and then I'll have to be careful of this wire that leads up to this lever here, which is near that large rubber wheel that the motor drives, which in turn drives the smaller wheel on top, which in turn drives the platter. So let's take that platter off and see what we can do. It looks like this screw and this screw is all I'm going to have to remove. The whole thing should drop right out. There's the upper rubber wheel. It was a little bit difficult to see in the last video, and I was a little disappointed in the way I did that, so let me give you a little better shot here. Let me get this light real down close so you can see. One wheel driving the other. Well, I discovered that in addition to removing the 2 screws, this speed changing knob has to come off, and this nut has to be removed, and that should allow the entire motor to drop out. A little tip about working on this kind of a situation. What we have is a metal nut against plastic. And a lot of times folks will come up there and they'll get a big old pair of pliers or something like that, and they'll start working those pliers back and forth, and when they get all done they have scratches, big digs all the way around the nut. Don't do that. Be careful. Go slow. Just get it from the top, or use a socket that fits, and sometimes even a socket that has a rough edge on it, it'll tear up the plastic. All you have to do is just watch what you're doing. Just sort of break the thing loose just enough so it's loose, and then go ahead and use your fingers the rest of the way. The reverse procedure puts it back on. Alright, now all I have to do is move the motor to where it's off that wire. There it is. The wire just popped loose, and the motor's fairly free. I'll go ahead and take the wires out from underneath this thing, give myself plenty of room. This entire motor operation I'm doing right now was a result of Grassulo, the commenter on my last video. He told me to, let me see here, he told me to pick up a can of, or a bottle of this 3-in-1 oil, motor oil. It's 20 weight. And of course here it says it's a special blend for 1/4 horsepower motors or larger. I don't think that's a 1/4 horsepower motor, but it should work because we don't need to use a whole lot. There is such a thing as using too much oil or too little. You got to kind of find that happy medium. Don't flood it, just get it down in there. Now we'll find out where we have to do it. You know, I didn't even know this stuff existed. So I appreciate his comment, and I told him I would give it some thought. And of course, I always react to a good idea. These 3 studs go down through these 3 rubber bushings, and they're held in on the other side by these I keep wanting to say lock washers or snap rings, but they're really not. They're keepers. It's a snap type keeper, one on each, and once I released those, this entire mechanism here came loose, and now I have the motor free. So now I have to sit around and figure out how to tear apart this section of the motor. This is where the shaft goes up through the motor, and this is the part that needs to be lubricated down in there. And I need to lubricate down in here also, which I might be able to just get to from the top. I don't know. Now, this is kind of an interesting arrangement. These posts are threaded down the center. You can see it right there. And the screws that come in from the other side, from here, go down through the center there. Pretty slick. She's apart. This is the rear of the motor, which goes on like that. And this is the front piece right here. And I don't see any pads, I don't see any oiling ports. So I'm going to drip a little bit of oil down into there. I think it might feed down into there. I think it might feed from the bottom. Stick the oil, let me get this pointer here. I'll probably stick a little oil down in that area there, all the way around. Because this brass bushing is not turning. So the oil apparently feeds from the bottom. I may wind up putting a little grease. I'm not going to put very much oil down in there because it may only be grease. I don't know. I don't see any grease at all. A little bit of oil coming off of my fingers, but not much. But probably the most interesting thing of all here is look what it's got right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. Right there where my finger's at. Made in USA. There's something you young folks probably haven't seen for a while. Here's a little something I discovered by accident. These bearings actually move back and forth. Look at there. Tilt that way. I can move the bearing back the other way. They rotate in the cup. Tilt back that way. Kind of interesting, huh? Both of them. Both this one and that one. Well, let's see if I can get this thing back together now. I've got it all oiled. I did take this, I took my brass brush and I did some cleaning on the surfaces here that touch the rubber wheels. Give it a little better grip, get some of that old crud off there, but that's all I'm going to do to it. And let's see if we can get it back together now. Just a quick little recap before I completely put this thing back together. I oiled. I elected not to go with grease. I went strictly with oil, which is again this 3-in-1 motor oil, which is a special blend. It says for 1/4 horsepower or larger. It's a SAE 20. I oiled it on the top of the bearing. I oiled it on the bottom, and I oiled it on the bottom of this one over here. Everything was put back together. It's spinning very nicely, very loosely. I like that. It looks real good. And I went ahead and cleaned these different steps for the different speeds that work the rubber wheels. So let's get the rest of it back together. In order for the speed changes to take effect on this thing, you turn your speed knob on the top of the deck here, and this wheel right here, the larger wheel, moves up and down these steps, which means that this mechanism right here would have to go up and down, or this mechanism would have to go up and down. I haven't quite figured that out yet. Don't think it's all that necessary. Which means that there's going to have to be some kind of lubrication placed in each one of these holes and on these felt pads. It took me a while to figure out what these felt pads were for. It's to maintain a good oiled supply of oil to the inside of these rubber bushings, so that either this or this can move up and down with the speed changes. So let's put a little oil in there. The last thing I'm going to do before setting this thing back in, I've already got my keepers back onto my studs that hold the motor to the mechanism. I'm going to put a little oil right here. This little baby moves in and out like that. It moves, this thing here moves on this post here, and it moves on this post here. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple drops of oil down in there, and maybe a little drop of oil down in there. Anything that I see that moves, and it does move, that little hinge right there. And I'll probably wind up applying a little bit of grease along this shaft, along this slot right here also, because that goes in and out. So I'll be playing around with it here for the next few minutes, putting oil here, there, and without going crazy with the oil. Just a little drop is all it takes. Well, that's it. Everything is back in. Whether or not it'll work, that's a whole nother story. This is the pickup arm wire, and this thing here is a little bit ragged. I'm gonna go ahead and take that off and resolder it before I put it back together. Let's see what we can do with that stylus. For those of you who don't know what a stylus is, it's the gizmo that holds the needle. In this case, I have a two-sided stylus, one for long playing records to include 45 and 16s, and the other side is for 78, and it's flipped like this. You just take that little lever and flip it over, back and forth, depending on what you want. This side says LP, right there in that flat spot. You can't see it in the camera, I don't think. And the other side says 78. So what I need to do is remove this, and I'll do that by lifting up this black tab right here, and this whole little gizmo, this little elbow looking thing should come right out. So see how it lifts up right there? I'll go ahead and get my thumbnail underneath that thing and then extract it. You gotta be real careful right here because the front of the needle fits in a little Y thing, and you don't want to tear up that little Y thing. So let's go ahead and see if I can't get it out of there. Well, there it is. There's a piece of cake. All I had to do was lift up that little flat piece right there and extract it from that little piece of copper Y thing. I don't know if you can see. It's kind of a rest or a guide. And then it comes out. Now I have a new one I'm going to put back in. Well, as predicted, it is not yet repaired. However, a friend or an acquaintance of mine stopped over to pick up a radio that I had repaired for him. And we talked about it. He's an old ham radio operator from years ago. Built his own, he built 3 Heathkit color televisions in his life. I thought that was interesting. Most people barely get through one. Anyway, he got looking at this, and we both got looking at it. And he feels that, you know, this is the input from the a tone arm. It comes on through here, and when this switch is flipped over here, it goes on up through this capacitor up into this IF can right here, and then it comes out of the IF can between these two capacitors over and up to the plate here, and also through this capacitor to the control grid here. So he said, you know, if all of this stuff is right, which it is, and this capacitor is good, which I had changed out already just to make sure, and he said the chances are you might have a problem in this IF can, which is what I was thinking anyway, but I didn't really want to tear it back apart. But you know, he said, well, you're going to have to do that. I said, yeah, I guess you're right. I did change this resistor and this resistor, so we'll check and make sure things are hooked up properly. If not, then I'll make them proper. So that's my next chore. Tear that IF can apart again.
I have a question about this. A question that involves logic.